Well, welcome back, everybody. We're at the halfway point of Winterfest. And Nicole is back with me with another great guest coming up. Nicole, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Roderick. Well, I'm really excited. We have Luigi Zingales, who is a professor of entrepreneurship and finance at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. He is the co-author of Saving Capitalism from the Capitalists, which is a book National Review called one of the most powerful defenses of the free market ever written, and I can agree with that. He is contributing editor of the City Journal and an author of a forthcoming book, A Capitalism for the People, which is, I believe, going to be released in June. Dr. Zingales was quoted by Governor Palin in her second book, America by Heart. She wrote, "Professor Zingales makes the crucial point that there is a difference between being pro-market and being pro-business. Both political parties are at fault in failing to acknowledge this distinction." Welcome, Professor Zingales. We're so excited you could come to GrizzlyFest.
Oh, I am excited to be able to talk to you.
And we know you've been traveling today and are probably eager to rest and relax, but I know we'll have an exciting conversation with you. And also joining me in this segment is Peter Singleton, who we all know and love around Palin Nation. Peter is the Iowa State Coordinator for O4P. He has worked as an attorney and in software sales and also does great ministry work. Peter holds a law degree from the University of California Hastings School of Law, also an MBA from Berkeley, so I'm surrounded with two very smart men today, and he is closely following developments in the financial system. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you so much, Nicole, and it's great to be on the line with Professor Zingales.
Great. Well, I'm going to start off, Professor Zingales. I loved your book, the 2004 book, Saving Capitalism from the Capitalists. I'd heard about it, always wanted to read it. I've been in anticipation of our interview. I did read it, and you were really prophetic in warning about the threats to the free market that come as a result of financial distress. And you wrote that book before the big crunch of 2008. And as I mentioned, the National Review said that this was one of the strongest defenses of free markets ever written. So let me just start off by asking you, what makes you so passionate about defending and, more importantly, defining free market capitalism?
I think that one of the reasons is I grew up in a country where there was no free market system. It was really a chronic capitalist system, and when I grew up, was actually in danger of collapsing in a socialist system. We were like a few miles away from a communist country, and there was always the fear that the Communist Party would take over in my country. So I came to America as really sort of the land of freedom, and I feel that things are degenerating here, and unfortunately, sort of America looks more like Italy, and in the worst part of Italy. If it looked like Italy for the food, it would be great, but it looks more like Italy for the politics and the market, and that's the bad part.
Right. So you really have a perspective that so many of us don't, having just become accustomed to what we see in our country, not really realizing what we could lose. And in fact, your new book that you're writing, A Capitalism for the People, Recapturing the Lost Genius of American Prosperity, it sounds like you're going to talk about what the stakes are, what we could lose here in America, and maybe you've got some hopeful prescriptions too for how we can turn things around. What can you tell us about your book?
Oh, absolutely. And it says, first of all, you're absolutely right. And it says, I woke up a day and it said, oh, gee, it might be that American is turning the way of Italy, and people here are not realizing because they've not seen this before. I did live this before, and I can see the sign better than most, not because I'm smarter than anybody else, it's because just I've lived it already. And I remember that when I went around and presented my Saving Capitalism, in the United States, people were not particularly excited. They were more excited abroad because it resonated more. And here in America, we think that we've been blessed with such a good system overall, at least historically, that we give it for granted. And I think it's not granted. It is at risk. And I think that the financial crisis and the bailout show how deeply sort of flawed the system is. And I've not seen any real attempt at changing the issues. And actually, the only attempt I've seen come from the left and trying to destroy sort of capitalism, to use a sort of bad word, is to throw away sort of the baby with the bathwater. And I think that I do believe that a free market system works very well. What we need to do is to fight to preserve the rules and the system that makes this free market system work. And I think that the United States had a popular tradition of capitalism. The reason why I chose that title is clearly referenced from the Gettysburg Address, but I think is the fact that there is a popular free market ideas in the vast majority of the American people. And so you...
Did we lose Luigi? Sounds like. Or did I get lost? Hold on. Well, while we're waiting for Professor Zingales to call back in, he might have had his call dropped. I know he was traveling today. He just gotten in from a flight, so maybe he's in the airport or something. But we hope TSA didn't get him. But Peter, I'll just bring you on. Professor Zingales was talking about how the bailouts really threaten the free markets, and I know conservatives and Tea Partiers have been outraged by TARP. Representative Paul Ryan called it crony capitalism on steroids, and Peter Schweitzer talked about how TARP money enriched, Warren Buffett and GE, Goldman Sachs, all the big billionaires club. So Peter, what are the ramifications to the free market from TARP and other things like that? I'll just bring Peter on real quick.
Sorry.
Oh, we got you back. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I'm sorry. We this happens sometimes, but I was just going to ask you about, you mentioned how bailouts can have a very corruptive effect on the free market, and I know so many of us have been just enraged by TARP. Representative Paul Ryan in Wisconsin called it crony capitalism on steroids. From your research on free markets, what is going to be the impact of something like TARP for the future?
I think that the problem with TARP is the problem with sort of the approach that's been prevailing for a long time, is that if you make a mistake in the financial industry, you don't pay for that mistake. So it's becoming more and more a one-way bet in which sort of if I win, I keep the money, and if I lose, you pay the cost. You, the taxpayers, pay the cost. And what makes it so insidious is that this is presented on as a way to help people in a distressed situation, which is true. When things go poorly, then you don't want to have so much disruption, and that's the reason why TARP was introduced and was sold as a way to save America. But I think that was presented as the only alternative. The out was either you approve this amount of money or you are going to have the ATM silent and the world will fall apart. And what I've been saying and advocating is there were alternatives that were not presented, were not even considered, and the reason why we're not considered is because they were penalizing more the financial industry, and I think that's really the ultimate example of crony capitalism.
Should we have let the banks go bankrupt?
I think that my proposal from the beginning was to manage a form of a bankruptcy process. I think that we don't want to have bank panic. We don't want to go back to the Great Depression where people were queuing in line and were not sure whether they get their money from the banks. However, banks have a lot of long-term debt in their capital structure. This debt could have been impaired, so it could have been used to bear some of the losses before the taxpayer was involved. And basically there was no political will to do that, and that, I think, is where the problem is.
So we really let them just get away with all that they had done wrong. I don't even think anybody has been held to account for the bad decisions that were made. I saw something somewhere that most of the CEOs and the executives at I think Governor Palin might even mention it, that they still have their jobs. How is that possible?
Yeah, I think they have their job, they have their money. They didn't even want to go after them and trying to reclaim some of the money because, as you declare some form of bankruptcy, there was a way to try to claw back some of the excess compensation that were paid. And I think one of the reasons why they did not want to sort of trigger any form of bankruptcy is because in that way there was no legal framework to claim the money back. And I think that's pretty outrageous.
Yeah, and also we've seen in response to the crisis the passage of the Dodd-Frank regulation. And that's one of the things that you bring up time and again in your book is just how the cycle of, when companies get in trouble, when economies get in trouble, then there's this hue and cry for government intervention, and then sometimes the intervention really leads to bad things for the free market. And could you, from your perspective, is Dodd-Frank one of those things that, Governor Palin essentially described it as letting the foxes oversee the hen house? What's your impression of Dodd-Frank?
Look, I think Dodd-Frank, first of all, is a monstrosity because it's 2,400 pages. And it mandates 67 studies and further regulation down the line. I think it is designed in a way that no human being can basically follow it. And in the shade of this complication, all things happen. I think that all too often we advocate for zero regulation. I think that sometimes we need some regulation, but that regulation should be so simple that anybody can understand. Because the moment we lose the understanding of that regulation is for sure designed or implemented in the interest of the incumbents. So I think that something needed to be done after the financial crisis, but I was in favor of a much simpler approach that was market-based, not to have 200 agencies trying to sort of do studies and at the end do nothing. In a sense, I think we underestimate the tax that this regulation brings to our country. It's not just the cost for business, it's the cost of all of us. In a sense, every page of those 2,400 pages of Dodd-Frank regulation employ a few accountants, a few lobbyists, a few lawyers to fight over it. And this is unproductive work that is bringing down the competitiveness of America. So I think we do need some regulation, but the regulation can be simple. And that's where I really want to push it. It should be so simple that ordinary people like all of us can understand and decide whether this is a good idea or not a good idea. And so that will limit tremendously the amount and will limit the waste associated with regulation.
Wow, good points. Well, I'm going to let Peter jump in now, and I'm sure he has some questions. He's been pursuing these financial things as well. So, Peter Singleton, your thoughts and questions?
Yeah, you bet. And Professor Zingales and I had a chance to speak a little bit earlier as well. One thing I wanted to mention to the folks who are listening is that not only is Professor Zingales, he's a leading academic in the area of finance and the financial system, the vice president of the American Finance Association, but he's a prolific commentator on these issues, and he's directing those articles. He's published several dozen articles since the beginning of the financial crisis, and they're stunningly prescient. And there were articles that he wrote. For example, there was an article he wrote right in the middle, right after Lehman went down, and he basically laid out, there are free market solutions, the bailout's a mistake, and for example, here's something that he wrote in that very article. The decisions that will be made this weekend matter not just to the prospects of the United States economy in the year to come. They will shape the type of capitalism we will live in for the next 50 years. Do we want to live in a system where the profits are private but losses are socialized, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And another thing I wanted to comment before turning it over to Professor Zingales is Professor Zingales has consistently pointed out the distinction between a pro-market and a pro-business approach. And pro-business can be pro-market, but pro-business can also be favoring basically a financial oligarchy and who are not necessarily pro-markets. But free markets are incredibly life-giving. They lead to prosperity, but they also lead to individual liberty. And so I guess one thing I wanted to ask Professor Zingales is, we are your constituency for free markets, the people who are on this call, listening to the thousands of people in the Palin Grassroots Network. And what can we do to advocate for the free markets that we believe in and that you so passionately argue for?
I think that, I describe some of the things in my book. I think that the first thing that, and you're doing great, is awareness. I think that there are not enough people in the United States that understand how corrupt the system is. And I have to admit that when I started writing this book that I just finished, I myself did not understand how corrupt the system is to the ultimate. I think that the system of fundraising is really distorting in favor of the incumbents, and the rules are designed to employ the lobbyists and the lawyers in Washington not to make sense and make American productive. And so I think that participation in politics is crucial, and people like you can make a difference. And the way in which you make a difference is, number one, demand an absolute a stripping down of regulation to simple regulation that we can understand. And the same should be true for a simple tax code. I think that the differences in the tax code are horrendous, and they really facilitate the dishonest and the people with money that try to hide income from taxes from the state, rather than favoring hardworking America who needs to contribute to the public good, but don't want to feel expropriated. So I think that the need for simplicity and transparency is crucial. The second aspect, which I think is very important, is that we want to basically make it impossible to have subsidies to industry. I think that from agriculture to a lot of other industrial products, we have a system that favors the incumbent in many different ways. And, it's very easy for somebody in Washington to create a specific rule why, or specific reason why certain things are good. So you talk about green energy is great, why we don't subsidize green energy? And the next day is another thing. And you lose perspective of the overall thing. And my view is we should make it illegal to subsidize industry in any form or shape. And if the government wants to do trying to direct the economy, which we don't want, but if we want to have that, then they can do it effectively through taxes, specific taxes, rather than through subsidies. And you will see that these specific taxes will never take place. So let me make a specific example. We know today that there are a lot of subsidies to the housing sector. And these subsidies are very regressive because you can deduct your mortgage from your income, and the richer you are, the bigger is the subsidy. And this subsidy, we know as economists, get capitalized in the house prices and make the house prices more expensive. So the poor people get treated twice because they cannot take much of a deduction, and they see the price of the house going up. So we should eliminate this distortions because this distortion amount to a tax on rental. Do you really? How popular would be somebody in Washington say, "I want to tax people who rent"? We'll go nowhere. Why they go somewhere? Because they try to make a case that you have to defend the American dream of owning a house to everybody, and so they end up subsidizing the housing industry. So I want to sort of cut down at the root this sort of mechanism, and the only way to do it is to say it's illegal to make any subsidy. If you really think that there are some sort of distortion in the market, which I think are very few, you can address them with taxes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds great. And one thing that you made it really clear in Saving Capitalism, you and the co-author there, is that ultimately there's rules of the road. And what we need, for example, in your introduction or one of your first chapters, you talk about what we need these simple and speedily enforced laws, clear accounting standards, effective regulatory and supervisory authorities. And when it's too complex, it's very easy for the oligarchs to game those.
Absolutely. And actually, I'm very pleased that you have, I think you had this morning or you will have this afternoon, a session on whistleblowing, because I think that whistleblowing is a very strong form of popular control. And I think that we could eliminate a lot of government agencies today and replace them with a whistleblower incentive scheme, a way to protect and reward good citizens who expose corruption and fraud. And even if we have very simple rules, these can be enforced by ordinary people rather than by government agencies who don't have the political will to go after the incumbents and the powerful.
You bet. Yeah, that's very, very, very true. Now, we only have a few minutes left, and what I wanted to ask you about is the policy responses thus far, in both Republican and a Democratic administration, to the financial crisis, which began in 2007. And I'll give you a couple people who have talked about this. You may not agree with them, but there's certainly an argument that they have a good point. One is Simon Johnson, former chief economist to the IMF, and he calls the bailouts and the increased power to the financial industry today as a quiet coup. Bill Black, who was a senior regulator during the savings and loan crisis and now is a professor in Kansas City, talks about the 1,000 people that went to jail after the savings and loan crisis and the complete dearth of any regulatory enforcement, any civil actions, any prosecutions in our crisis, which is massively bigger than the crisis in the savings and loan crisis. And the last, I don't know if you're familiar with Naked Capitalism and Eve Smith, but she did an interview in it's a fairly well-read financial blog, and she's a former financial professional. And she did an interview with Dylan Ratigan in December of last year, and she talked about what she's hearing from insiders is that they're scared to death to sue big banks over fraudulent behavior because they're afraid for their personal safety. And they're afraid that not only will bad things happen to them or their families, but the government will come down on them. So with all that, how would you assess the policy responses thus far, and where does that leave us right now?
I think the policy response has been terrible. And it says, I think that the best example of how terrible it is something that happened to me in the spring of 2009. I had some students, I teach entrepreneurial finance, and I had some students come up to me because they wanted to start a new kind of financial intermediary. And initially I was very excited about the idea because it sounded like an interesting new idea. And then as I move along, I realized that what they wanted was somebody that will help lobby in Washington to get some subsidy from Washington. So if we are in a system in which even the startups are specializing in lobbying Washington, I think we are losing the essence of what free markets are about.
Absolutely, absolutely. And where do we go from here? What are we faced with right now? If obviously the crisis, we're not out of the crisis, and we're heading for the next leg of the crisis, or at least that's my personal opinion. What could happen, and what can we do to prevent that from happening?
I think that what you can do is what you are doing. I think it creates a movement that really fight to change the current system. And I want to go back because you raised the name of Simon Johnson. I think that Simon Johnson says a lot of things that are true. I think he's a bit too extremist, and he has a different direction where he wants to take the system. He believes in sort of a more powerful government intervention. He doesn't believe in free markets as I do. And I think that the rule number one is not to let the intellectual debate of people who are against chronic capitalism be monopolized from the left. I think it's a very dangerous thing because eventually I think that there will be awareness of the danger of chronic capitalism, and if the only people speaking against are from the left, they will take over and they will push the system even in a worse direction. So I think that there should be a fight to convince conservatives that being supportive of business does not mean to be in bed with business. And the fact that business has in the past helped fight some good battles for free market doesn't mean that now they are. And again, I think that I have this advantage from where I come from because Berlusconi is the ultimate example of how chronic capitalism can destroy a country. And that's the reason why I want to fight back here.
Thank you so much. We're going to have to wrap it up. Thank you, Peter Singleton and Professor Zingales. Everyone check out the new book this summer, Capitalism for the People. You can pre-order it on Amazon, and Grizzly Fest continues at the top of the hour after this break. Thank you both.